Hi, everyone. Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and today is the Author Journey Day. We're really excited because today we're going to be talking about translating your book. And I hope that there are some folks watching live and that you've prepared your questions for our guest today, Montaha Hidefi, who is an OC Publishing author. She is a color archaeologist and world-renowned speaker. She'll tell us about her journey in translating her memoir rather, from English to Spanish. So welcome, Montaha, to the author journey. Yay.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Anne, for having me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We've been working together for a few years now, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the author journey. And this is a very unique topic that we're going to be discussing because it's got a lot of complexities to it. So we're going to delve right in. I'm going to watch for questions, just reminding everybody who's out there watching to make sure that you write in your comments or questions while we're chatting, and we'll get to them. And hopefully Montaha will be able to unveil some of the mysteries behind the translation. Montaha is multilingual. She speaks 5 languages. But in this particular instance, she translated her books, which are behind me here, from English to Spanish. So talk a little bit about why you decided to translate your book, other than the fact that the countries that it's set in are not predominantly English speaking, but give us a little insight into how that sort of evolved.
Actually, there is probably the most important question that an author should ask themselves if they are thinking of translating a book, whether it's fiction or non-fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first question is to knowing the demographics, who are the readership of your book. So that determines why you want to translate your book to any language. In my case, my book, the stories of my memoir happened, a big chunk of the stories happened in Venezuela, which is my country of birth. And obviously we speak Spanish in Venezuela. So when I initially wrote the English version, I was translating my stories into English for the English readership. So after we published the English version of Groping for Truth, and various readers from South America wanted to read the book. And so that triggered basically the idea of translating to Spanish, because it's like going to the root of the setup of the book, which is in Venezuela. So Latin America and South America, with the exception of Brazil, it's a huge and vast demographics that speak Spanish. And we also have big demographics of Spanish speaking in Canada, as well as in the US, not to mention Spain, of course. So there is a large demographics for English speaking books. And it was for me just like a normal thing to have my book in Spanish. First of all, for the readership, obviously, but second is to just portray the stories in the language that they happened. Obviously, other stories happened in Syria, which happened in Arabic. And so I won't be translating the book any soon into Arabic, but that's how I think is how it came to the forefront for me. But different people might have different reasons for translating.
I think, and that's of course the fact that you're multilingual, and that you also have expertise and training in translation. So it's not something that any of us could just say, "Oh, I'm going to translate my book and sit down and translate it," even though you may have a second language. what are your thoughts on an individual author and how they would go about if they decide there is an audience, and yes, the demographics would lend itself to having their book in another language?
It certainly helps a lot if the person is bilingual, but
Mhm.
just being bilingual, speaking the other language, is not sufficient for the person, any person, to undertake any translation project, whether it's an article or a book or a single speech. And the reason for that is that specifically, let's talk about books here. When you want to translate a book to the other language, and even if you spoke the other language, maybe you don't have a forte in grammar or syntax, or maybe you do not know the publishing conventions of that other language. And sometimes when you are translating to another language, uh, well, I would say not sometimes, but most of the time, it is not really a good idea to translate word by word, because that's your base. But you have to have, in the other language, you have to have your syntax and your telling the story in the way it should be told in that other language, uh, based on society and on tradition, etc. So in my specific case, obviously my Spanish is my mother tongue, and I studied Spanish up to the 6th grade, and I have been out of Venezuela for many, many, many years. And I must say, I don't work in Spanish, although I'm very fluent in reading and writing. But because I have a master's in translation in English, French, and Arabic, that helps me understand the ins and outs of translations. How do you take a piece and put it into another context, into another language? And so when I decided to do the translation, it just felt natural for me to do it myself and not ask someone else to do it. However, even though I did the translation myself and I polished it and went through it various times, I did have to find someone else to edit the Spanish version, because I have to say that I do not know the conventions of Spanish publishing. Because I have been out of South America and Latin America for so long. I mean, over time, the language evolves. So the Spanish that my stories happen in might be different when you tell them to the Spanish that people speak nowadays. So I did basically contract a person that is from Colombia, and in Colombia they speak pretty much 100% the same Spanish that we speak in Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's a translator also, and she's an editor, and she
Mm-hmm.
worked like in editing here in Canada. So she speaks also English very well. And
And that's,
so
yeah, that's
that
good
did.
advice. That's good advice, no matter what language, is that when you write a book, a full-length book, and you've finished it and gone through, phases and phases of editing, you still need a proofreader. So whatever language it is, the proofreading is so critical, as you know. We have a couple of questions. We want to have a shout out. Lana, hi Sue, and Cindy's with us as well. We have a couple of questions, but I'm going to hang on just for a second, because as this part of the conversation is relevant to a conversation that we had. You originally wrote the book in English. However, most of the memories of what you were writing about happened in another language, whether it was Arabic or Spanish. So how did that impact the writing of the English? And also to share with folks, as you were doing the translation, there were things new, um, content. There was new content that was added. So that's when we decided that we would also relaunch a renewed version. So back to the whole writing it in English, but remembering it in different language. Like, how does that kind of
It is
confusing.
complex, I should say, because at least for me, I don't know about other people, but at least for me, I mean, whatever happened in my life, and you, as you said, I speak 5 languages, and I lived in various countries of the world, and I have visited various countries of the world. So in my mind, when I bring to the forth any memory that happened in my life, that memory comes in the language that it happens.
That's so
It
fascinating.
happened rather.
I
And
love
so, for instance, memories of my childhood that happened all in Spanish, when I think of them or when they appear in my mind, they
it.
don't appear in English, they don't appear in French, they appear in Spanish. Even my dreams from those times, if I remember them, they will appear in the language that I dreamed them. And so it's the same thing for the stories that happened in Syria. Basically, they happened in Arabic, and I could remember them in Arabic. And so when I wrote Groping for Truth in English, obviously, I had to figure out what language I have to use to be true to the stories that happened in different languages. And
Mhm,
I think I did achieve that.
mhm,
However, over time, because giving voice to my silence, we have published it 3 years after Groping for Truth.
mhm,
And so during the 3 years that lapsed between Groping for Truth and Giving Voice, I did come across some notes that it's a journal basically that I was doing during treatment when I was living in Montreal.
mhm,
And so I didn't know that I had actually, I totally forgot about those notes, but they appeared in an old box. And so also, when I wrote Groping for Truth, I must say I was under a lot of emotional pressure. And it was not easy for me to remember uh, everything and to put everything on paper. So I might have just disregarded some events or didn't think of them. I was too overwhelmed.
mhm,
And so by the time I decided to write Giving Voice in Spanish, I did take advantage of that time, and then I included a lot of sections based on the information that I found in my notes from 1996, I think. And I also was able to add information that I remember that was not included in Groping for Truth. So once I finished Giving Voice, and you and me, we had a conversation, and we were discussing about this, and you said, well, maybe you should update the English version. And that's what happened. And we decided to do Giving Voice to My Silence in English. And that's how I basically updated all the manuscript and added all the new sections. Plus, obviously, there's an addition of a complete chapter at the end of the book. It's chapter 24, which is almost like a sequel of the book of what happened between Groping for Truth and Giving Voice to My Silence. And it talks a lot about my feelings and my emotions and what happened to me, what I lived basically after
mhm,
both my mom and my dad passed during this period of time.
mhm.
And
Hence,
so
hence
that
groping.
was almost like
Mhm,
writing totally a new book. It
mhm,
was really writing a new book.
mhm. So for anybody who already has read or has Groping for Truth, that was released in 2018, there is a significant amount of new content in the re-released English version, which we retitled Giving Voice to My Silence. So one of the questions that one of our viewers, I think it was Sue Slade, from Dartmouth Book Exchange, asks, how long, oh no, it was from Lana Shoup, Atlantic Book Reviews. Hi, Lana. How long did it take to do the entire translation?
Well, I must say that I did not set for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day doing the translation, but overall, with on and off, it
Mhm,
took me about 6 months. But we have to consider that I had to stop for 3 months because I started in February of 2021. That's when I started. And I was somewhere like in the middle of the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother died from COVID. And then emotionally, it really had a huge impact on me. So I could not continue writing,
Mm-hmm.
especially because the majority of the stories include her, basically.
Right.
And so I was very much affected by that, and which was unexpected for me in the
Mm-hmm.
way I was affected. So I had to stop. And for 3 months, about 3 months, I could not really do anything with the translation. So when I came back to it, it was still painful, but I would say overall, let's say 3 months for translation.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say that I did not sit and translate word to word. I did help myself with software
Mm-hmm.
just to start the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And I do recommend for someone who wants to really start a translation to use a software. There are many softwares out there that help the translation, but it is not obviously your final version. It
Mm-hmm.
just gives you the fundamentals as a base, so you don't have to go through it word by word at the beginning.
Right.
And then once you have that base, then you can go through it and polish it and take care of grammar, change terms, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, I didn't want to invest in a software because those softwares might be a bit expensive. And so what I did basically, I just used Google Translator. And I know that a lot of people think that Google Translator is not that great in translating. I do agree for most part,
Mm-hmm.
but it works based on your own usage of the translator. And so the most you use the translator, the most the algorithms will work for you. So for me, that like the basic translation wasn't really that bad.
Mm-hmm.
But if it
That's good to
wasn't
know.
for our friend Lina Peralta, who did the edits,
Yeah.
and she knows very well the Spanish conventions,
Mm-hmm.
and so she really had to go through everything that I did, and we had to always negotiate. She will tell me, this is what the convention says, or this
Mm-hmm.
terminology, I don't understand it, or, we don't use this word
Word
anymore.
choice. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was really a very good working together as a team
Mm-hmm.
because she was an extension of me and I was an extension of her. So we did help each other. At the
Right.
end of the day, we really did help each other
Well,
in having the final manuscript ready.
and we want to also give a shout out to Lena that if anybody is looking for a Spanish editor, that Lena is available, would be interested in hearing from you. And she said we could share her email address, peralta.lena@gmail.com. And again, this was the editor that Montaja worked with in the translation of her memoir from English to Spanish. So let's talk a little bit about and people are also commenting on how brave you are to not only share your story but to work through that grief. And for people who have not read the book, there's a fair amount of abuse and conflict in the story between you and your mother. And during the time that you were translating, as you said, you lost her, and there was a lot of processing that had to happen during that time.
Well, thank you for those who think that I'm brave. I must say that there is no bravery in doing that. There is more fear at the beginning and conflict, obviously, like you said. However, and you were with me through all the process from the beginning when we started thinking about writing until now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we published Groping for Truth, I was devastated by fear, because I didn't know what was going to happen after people read the book,
Right.
especially that I did not hide the names of people. I didn't use pseudonyms or anything. I wrote the first name of every single person that is mentioned in the book. And that was also another side of the fear, because I didn't know how some people might basically react.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided that I didn't want to hide the name of the people that affected me, because that will be like continuing the abuse.
Victimization. Yeah.
And you know what I mean? So, uh, anyway, 3 years later, as I was writing, Giving Voice to My Silence, I have noticed how much liberated I was in comparison to 3 years or 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
because these stories, they don't affect me anymore in the way they have affected me before, as if, and that might sound weird for some people, but as if those stories, they don't belong to me anymore. As if is a shared story that I share with other people, and as if somehow inside of me, as if they happened to someone else. They happened to the Montaha of that time, but they did not happen to this Montaha, the one that is here today. Although obviously the effects of everything that happened, that doesn't go away. But I think it's the coping with the stories, as and the coping with everything that I have carried throughout my life until I published the book,
Mm-hmm.
is what helped me. And that's why ever since I really recommend that if you have a hidden story, maybe you don't want to publish it in a book, but at least go away, go ahead and go and talk to someone about it. Just verbalizing the story helps make it not your own. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like sometimes you say, you know, my pills or my cancer or my this. Well, that thing doesn't belong to you. Don't appropriate it. It's better to say the pills that I take, or the headache that I had, or the cancer that I suffered, but don't appropriate the things that happened to you. And it's the same thing with the stories. It
Mm-hmm.
is not my story. It is a story that I lived. So that it doesn't belong to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there is freedom and liberation in that way of looking at things that happened
Mm-hmm.
to,
Of course, now
to us.
with the launch of the Spanish version, there will be an even broader sharing of the story, so and more release. I would guess. Um, what is some of the advice that you would give to people who are thinking about having their books translated, especially someone who only has one language but knows that there is an audience for their book in a second language? What is your advice?
Well, first of all, you have to find someone that you can trust
Hmm.
and that can understand the story. The person, before I, for instance, contracted Lena to work with me on the translation, on the editing and polishing, etc., I sent her a sample from the book. I think it was a couple of pages, and I asked her to do the review of the translation. And so I sent her the English version and I sent her the Spanish version. And I wanted her to look at the Spanish and go through it and polish it and send it back to me. And send. So when she did that, and because I speak obviously Spanish is different from someone that doesn't speak the other language,
Hmm.
I immediately thought that she could work with me. Also, I had to explain to her how difficult the topic of the book was. And so I had to make sure that she will be okay with working with the content of the book, because if she wasn't okay, she wouldn't have been able really to go and dig into those difficult topics and
Mhm.
details of the story. So it's very important, find someone that can understand, first of all, your story. I had an extensive chat with Lena, first of all, on a video call, and then after that we worked with the sample, and then after that we started working.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of people out there that can translate, whether individuals that work as freelancer translators
Mhm.
or also as agencies,
Yeah.
but you have to find the right fit. For instance, I speak various languages. If anyone is interested, I can also support with translations. I wouldn't translate into Italian though, but I would work with English, French, Arabic, and Spanish.
That's
I know
awesome.
that Lina also works with Spanish, English, and French. So there are a lot of people that can do that. And if you don't want to work with someone like Lina or with someone like me, you can always find someone.
Well, and that's awesome. I've been putting up your website, so if people out there are looking for advice on translation, we have also, of course, I only speak one language, English. The publishing company, OC Publishing, we've translated into Mi'kmaq, one of our children's books, and another children's book into Arabic. Um, there was an expert locally, of course, that we used for Mi'kmaq, but I did use an organization called the Language Marketplace, which might be a good place to start. But as Montaha says, it's really like working with an editor. It's important to have a good rapport. There has to be trust. And I think one more thing that we should touch on before we wrap up, Montaha, is the different dialects that you might be dealing with. So in all of these languages, in any language, even in English, there could be hundreds of different dialects. So word use is really important, knowing where your target market is, and choosing a translator who understands those dialects. I mean, can you expand a little on that as well, Montaha?
Obviously, for instance, in Latin America and South America, in each country, there's a different Spanish dialect. Like I said at the beginning, Colombia and Venezuela, and also Cuba,
Mm-hmm.
we speak very similar Spanish. But as you go, for instance, to Chile or Argentina or Ecuador, they speak totally different dialect. But even though we might not understand each other, but we always understand each other. But when it comes to publishing, and specifically for Spanish, the convention is to use the general Spanish from Spain. That's like the Spanish from Spain convention that are basically understood and
Cross border.
spoken, if you want, in the entire Latin America and South America. So when it comes to French, obviously, if we're talking about having a book that relates specifically to Quebec and you wanted to write it in Quebecers French, it's different from if you want to publish it in France, which it needs to be like French from France, right? Because it's totally different. Well, when it
Arcadian
comes
French, my mom's background.
but when you go to the Middle East, for instance,
Mhm,
and in each country of the Arab world, they speak different
mhm,
Arabic,
mhm,
but they write the classic Arabic. So the classic Arabic is the one used for books and everything that is printed, magazines, articles,
mhm,
etc.
mhm,
So there is no problem with that because no matter where you are in the Arab world, you will have whatever is
understanding.
published in classic Arabic, which everybody understands.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
even in English, like English US versus English Canada, there might not be much difference. But when you go from North America to Britain or Australia, that's when you will find a lot of differences.
it's a very fascinating subject, and then you get into linguistics, and even if there's a word or a statement that is understood across the board, there's still nuances depending on where the book might be set. And in your instance, and we did talk a little bit about that when Lena was asking about certain turns of phrase, you had to keep it the way it was stated in your memory of 40 years ago or however long ago, because if you changed it to more contemporary language, then it wouldn't be relevant to the time that it was, that the scene had occurred.
That's correct. And in many occurrences in the book, we had to maintain the term of the memory itself and the way the story happened, and then after that I had to add something to explain it. For instance, like saying this is the word that we use then, or this is how it was set up in that time.
Mhm.
And these are like terms, I don't know, like a mob, like coleto.
Mhm.
Coleto is the word for mob in the 1960s and 70s in
Mhm.
Venezuela, which is not used anymore. They totally use a different term for that. So we
Like a
had to
mob,
use,
like as in crime mob, or a mob as in a big crowd?
no, a
Oh, a
mop
mob. Oh, to
to
oh, okay, okay.
wipe the
In the
floor.
floor, okay.
Yeah, this is just like a small
Yeah,
example, and
that's so true. So true. Different words are used in
mhm.
different ways in different eras. So when you're writing historical fiction or a memoir that is going into the past, these are also considerations when you're working with a translator, and really emphasizes how important it is to work closely, and especially when you're not translating word by word, you're translating conceptually. So I think we're just about out of time now. If there are any like final thoughts that you want to share about your translating journey.
I don't know what to say. I think we said a lot
Covered it
today, but
all.
what I would say, maybe if you are Spanish speaking, go get the book. I have a copy here, Dando Voz a Mi Silencio. And or if you are English speaking, go buy the English version. I have not received the English version yet because it just got published not too long ago, so I'm still waiting for those.
I just have
Uh,
my samples.
yeah, and if you want to get in touch with me, or if you want to go to know more about whether the translation or the content of the book, or where to get the book, obviously the book is available in all the major online stores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, you name it.
You really have
And
to.
also it is available in pretty much all the countries around the world.
Mhm. And you can also, if you go into your local bookstore, you can ask them to order it in for you.
Correct.
If that's if you would like to order from a brick and mortar store. So we're gonna sign off, and so thank you so much for sharing your story, Montaha, and we look forward to having you back soon, and maybe even featuring Giving Voice to My Silence in an upcoming OC Pub Book Club, which we're launching this month. So thank you again, Montaha, for joining me. It's been a pleasure, and we're going to sign off
Thanks for having me.
and we'll look forward to seeing you all next month, or next month. It's already the end of February. Pretty incredible. So we'll be sharing what our upcoming author journeys are, and also more information on the OC Pub Book Club that we'll be launching this month. So for now, happy reading and stay safe, and we'll see you again real soon on the author journey, brought to you